All right, everybody. I'd like to thank everybody who is watching and following along as you've done for over the pretty much almost now, as we've kind of the virus pandemic together. I am Will Driscoll, the Executive Director of the Virginia Sports Hall of Fame. I'd like to thank you for joining us today on the Hall of Fame's Facebook Live interview series. We've done a few of these so far, and the discussion has always revolved around how we're coping without sports. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but it seems like that tide is turning, and there are signs of life. We're actually thrilled to be joined today by 2019 Virginia Sports Hall of Fame inductee Jeff Burton. Jeff is a South Boston native, 21-time winner on NASCAR's highest circuit, 254 top 10s as well, for everybody who's keeping count. But currently, Jeff is a lead analyst for NBC Sports NASCAR broadcast and NASCAR America, always a respected driver among his peers. It's a pleasure to be joined today by the mayor. So, Jeff, thanks for taking some time out of your busy schedule.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to spend some time with everybody. It'd be a lot more fun being able to be with everybody, having conversation in person. But if we can't do that, we'll find the next best thing. And Zoom has found a way to do some really cool stuff so we can communicate and do things like this. And it's fun to do them.
You're right. It's just been great to be able to still talk about sports, even though we don't really have the games and the events to talk about. Preview and do post-game wrap-ups. But you can follow Jeff on Twitter at Jeff Burton. Obviously, this is on Facebook Live, so if you have any questions, feel free to ask, and we'll try to get this on during the stream today. But I guess I'll just kick it off like this, Jeff. Most of the people we've been talking to, the first question is, where were you when you heard that sports were stopped? What was your reaction? You're actually the first person we get to ask about the return. How long had this decision been in the works, and when did you find out from NASCAR that you guys were going to be coming back May 17th?
Well, the conversations that started, you got to understand, I was on the ground in Atlanta. We had landed I fly with Joe Gibbs when I traveled there on their race with their race team. We had landed in Atlanta, headed to the racetrack, knowing things could change, and sure enough, they changed. And then immediately, honestly, what happens is you go through this process of, when are you going to start back, right? And they had a date that became very clear it wasn't going to happen. And then it was hard for any organization to say, we're going to do it on this date, because, you have to deal not just with your teams and your sport itself, but you have to deal with state and federal authorities. Like, when can you go places? So NASCAR has been juggling with states, with counties, with the federal government. They've been juggling that. And then also, what can the teams do? Because just for an example, so the governor of North Carolina said that race teams can go to work because they are like, they work on cars, like, an auto mechanic place, they work on a car. But in Mecklenburg County, North Carolina, the requirement was more stringent. It was stiffer. So Joe Gibbs Racing, and I believe Hendrick Motorsports, even though the governor said North Carolina could get going, those two shops couldn't, because the county of Mecklenburg County had a more stringent guideline, and you have to go by the most strict one. So imagine NASCAR trying to deal with all these things. So we started hearing rumors, 8 weeks ago, we're going to try to go back here, and then it would change. Well, we can go here, then it would change. We go here. You know what I mean? So finally, all the dots got connected, and local and state and county and federal officials, got comfortable with what NASCAR could do. And that's when it finally came out. But the work that it's gone into that, and by the way, still going into that. I mean, even though there's a schedule and a more detailed, longer schedule, I think will be released relatively soon, there's still a tremendous amount of work that's going into making all that happen. So this has been a moving target. And I expect some things to move again. I think that they're racing next weekend. I think that's going to happen. But I think how they race and what the next race, 3 races from now and all that, I think that's going to continue to move.
Where are most of these teams based? You mentioned how just in North Carolina, you have teams in different counties, and that may affect like how they can operate. But where are most of these teams based? Is North Carolina kind of the hub for that?
Yeah, North Carolina is where most of the teams are, but not all of them. And so if you think about it, so just like in the Truck Series, for example, there's a team that's out of Ohio. Well, what if they can't go to their shop? Is it fair for that team to not be able to race because they don't live in a state that they go to work? I mean, those are just conversations that you just never thought you would be having to have. Fortunately, most of the teams are in North Carolina, but they're in different counties. But now most of the teams have gone back to work, although it limited. They don't have full staffing. They're limited. One thing NASCAR has asked the teams to do is they said, if you go to the race shop, we're asking you not to go to the track,
Mhm.
and vice versa. And then also, if there's a way to do it with less people and have, because obviously you have to deal with the state laws, how do you do it with X amount of people versus what you were doing it with? So most of the teams have gone back to work, but in a different way.
What has the reaction been in racing circles? I mean, obviously everybody wants to get back to work, and that's not just sports. That's just pretty much everything right now. People just want to get back to work. But what was the reaction among the racers, the pit crews, the teams that are actually out there working?
Well, so they were ready to go back to work when we left Atlanta. You know what I mean? They were 2 months ago. They're like, let's go. You know what I mean? And you got to be careful, right? Because people are fearful for their jobs. Yeah. And the sport itself is fearful for its how it can survive, just like everybody is. So you got to be careful not to listen to those voices. Like, you got to listen to the voices of yes, we do have to go back to work, but we have to do it in a certain way. But the industry is keep this in mind. I don't know of another industry that is so reliant on corporate America and sponsorship and marketing agreements, marketing partners. I think NASCAR leads all categories in that, right? So, although every sport team has sponsors in some form or fashion, that doesn't normally make up the majority of their income. In our case, it does. And so it's really important for our sport to get back on the racetrack so that we can fulfill our obligations to our marketing partners. And so they can be getting their message out. And so it's vitally important. But from a country standpoint, outside of business, and I think this matters. I think morale matters. I think a live sporting event is going to do wonders. Forget the economy, forget the budget, forget all that stuff. Although, I wish we could, but act like that doesn't matter. But how do we get this country so that people are excited and they have something to do and someone to pull for and someone to pull against and all the things that competition makes happen, right? The reason there's a Sports Hall of Fame in Virginia is because of the passion that sports brings. So, being able to be one of the first sports back is important because of the morale of the country. That's not the reason to go back, right? The reason to go back is because the protocols are in place, things are in place so that we can go back. Motorsports is uniquely positioned, in my opinion. When the driver gets in the car, who the hell is he going to be in contact with, right? When the pit crews are changing tires, they're on pit road, they're in a fire suit, they have gloves, they have a helmet on, they have a head sock on. There's motorsports is this unique situation to get going again because of the very nature of how it works. And I think through that, I think we can be a leader. I think the sport can be a leader. And how does industry get back to work under these guidelines or those guidelines and different from this state to that state? I think we can help be a leader in getting back to work. We got to get back to work, right? But we also have to protect people. And I think we can be a leader in making that happen.
You actually just kind of alluded to it, that NASCAR is set up where they probably had an easier path to move forward than other sports like football, basketball, baseball, hockey, things like that, where you're always in contact with people. But there is still some adaptation that goes into it. So how is the crew, because that's still a confined space, what are the protocols in place to make sure that these safety measures are being implemented? Or what are the new safety measures?
Well, so it's a lot of them. I'm going to hit the highlights. So first of all, for these first few races, there's no practice. There's no qualifying. So they're going to drop the green flag with no practice and no qualifying.
Are they just going to base that off of standings? So
the first race they're going to base off point standings, and then what they're trying to figure out is how many races do they think they're going to have to go without qualifying. Mm-hmm. And so remember, with the way points are paid today, you get roughly a third of the way through the race, and if you're in the top 10, you get points for that. So it's not fair to just say, okay, every single race we're going to start by points. Perhaps it's not fair. Maybe it is. So they're trying to find a way so that maybe somebody starts on the pole one race and the next race they start 30th. You know what I mean? And mix the field up in an equal way so everybody has the same opportunity to go earn those points, because you couldn't get your position by qualifying. So they're still sorting that out. There's less people at the racetrack. You know, the teams are limited on the number of people they can bring. Obviously, unfortunately, there's no fans there, which is greatly disappointing. But hopefully, you know, they'll be able to watch it on TV. But the fans not being there, think about this for a minute, that opens up the infield. So now the teams can be spread out inside that racetrack. So before, every team was in one garage on the front straightaway at Darlington. Now you can put part of the teams in the motorhome, in the driver owner motorhome lot. You can put part of the teams on the back straightaway Xfinity garage. You can put part of the teams in the front straightaway garage. They're going to separate the teams. They're going to have different types of testing for people that are coming in the racetracks, temperature checks. Teams are going to be isolated from other teams. They're only allowing, I believe it's 2 people in the hauler at any one given time. There's a long list. There's a number of people that can be on top of the pit box. There's a number of people that can be in the garage, in the pit stall, and you still have to have a certain amount of space between you. You have to have a face mask in the garage. You have to have a helmet on pit road. There's so many protocols that they've been able to come up with. And, you know, they had to, I don't know how this process worked. I don't want to pretend to, but clearly, you know, for South Carolina, for North Carolina, for wherever we may be going, the state and the counties had to agree to it as well, right? They had to look at the plan and say, okay, this makes sense. So NASCAR didn't dream this plan up by themselves. They consulted with, you know, the CDC. They consulted with medical groups to come up with this plan. The race is going to, once they drop the green flag, it's going to look the same, but everything getting to that point is going to look completely different.
Yeah, no, this, like you just said, this isn't something that happened in a vacuum. I mean, there are so many layers to this, particularly with this virus and this pandemic. No, we were talking just before we went on, nobody's ever dealt with this. So this is something that there are so many layers to it. And it's good to hear that NASCAR has gone through those protocols, because, you know, you mentioned it. I think people are just itching for some type of competition to watch. And speaking of that competition, it is condensed. I mean, the initial rollout is 7 total events, including 4 Cup Series races in 11 days, hosting it at just 2 tracks, Darlington and Charlotte. How does the prep work go into that? I mean, because typically you're looking at a week, maybe 2 weeks with a few buys in there. You're looking at days now just to get ready for a race.
Well, so one of the things that's happened is that, you know, the race at Darlington is going to be, you know, basically the teams are going to drive there on Sunday, race, and drive home. You know, it's a 2.5 hour drive from the Charlotte area. The next race at Charlotte, most teams are here, so they'll drive to the track the morning of the event and drive back when it's over. Having no practice, think about this for one moment. So having no practice or qualifying means that no team has to have a backup car. No team has to have a backup engine. No team has to have a backup transmission, right? I mean, like, there's certain, you can't change an engine during a race. They don't let you. You won't need a backup car out. Once you get on a racetrack, you're done. So that allows the teams to staff the shops accordingly so that you can meet all the protocols that are going to be required to be met. So the track, the event at the track is the end result of everything else. So when I said everything around that changes, it changes a great deal for reasons, right? So even though I think logistically and safely, you probably could have had a practice, having a practice creates a situation where the people at the shop now have so much more work to do because you have to have a backup car. And so now you have to have more staffing at the shop than if you hadn't have had. So one thing leads to another, right? And so these first few races, I don't know what it's going to look like in July. I just don't know. I don't think anybody does. But for these first few races, to have this many races in this many days, you had to change stuff so that the teams are capable. And remember, they're operating with less people probably. So you got to change how things happen prior to the race so that, and you could make the races a little shorter, right? That doesn't do a whole lot. Maybe it keeps, if you had 2 races that were both shortened, maybe that keeps it where you can run an engine one race longer or something like that. But practice and qualifying and length of races, all that stuff adds up to needing more people.
Video troubles and sound. Still there,
How
Jeff?
about now?
Yep, got you now. Yep, I heard you finish up that last comment, but you talked about how the strain actually might be less on the crews because they're really just focused on the one car. Talk about the car though. For the people who don't understand the ins and outs of the cars, what kind of pressure goes into this apparatus over the course of 11 days and about 1,600 miles is what we're looking at.
Well, so the car that they're going to run at Darlington on Sunday afternoon is probably not the same car they have slated to run on Wednesday.
Okay.
Right. And then the car they're going to run at Charlotte the next Sunday is probably neither one of those 2 cars either. Because you have to plan as if you're going to wreck in every race, if that makes any sense. So, they are, they're working now. Most likely the cars that are going to run at Darlington next Sunday, they're ready. They're working on the cars that are going to run at Charlotte on Wednesday 2 weeks from now. That's probably what they're working on. So, and the teams have a little bit of an idea about what the proposed long-term schedule is, although knowing it's probably going to change. So they're trying to work ahead of that as well. The biggest issue for the car. So, these race cars have just an amazing amount of adjustments you can make to them. So here you're going to go to Darlington, perhaps the most difficult racetrack that the circuit goes to, with the exception of the Roval. The Roval is the hardest. How are you going to set it up? Like what springs, what shocks, what setup are you going to put in it, knowing you're not going to get practice? So how can you set that race car up so there's adjustability in it? So when your car takes off, because I promise you, everybody, when they unload at a racetrack and you're going to have practice, they unload with what they believe is the best setup they have. And none of them are. They all have to work. They all have to make them better. So all the pressure right now is on the engineers, the crew chief, and how are we going to set this race car up? Because we're not going to get a chance to practice it. And if the driver says, hey, I'm way too loose on the exit of 4, well, you're going to have to deal with it for a little while because we can't help you. That's really where all the pressure is going to be.
So does that bring in a driver safety issue then if they can't get out and practice? And you just mentioned Darlington is probably one of the tougher tracks. Do we expect to see people maybe throttle it down a little bit at the beginning while they get their feel? Are those first 50 laps, 25 laps, is that the practice, or are we just looking to rev those engines and go?
So, drivers are just like us. They all have different personalities. And there's a handful of them that are sitting there saying, this is a huge advantage for me. I'm better than those guys. First lap, I'm going to barrel down in there because I don't need practice. There's another group that's sitting there saying, well, I hope our car is good enough and I'm going to go make sure I don't make a mistake. You know what I mean? Like everybody's different, right? They're all different. But, most of them are type A personalities, and most of them, if you sit down and talk to them long enough, are convinced they're the best driver that's on the track. And they've been pinned up, right? So if you think about it, when we do races on a Monday, so it rained on Sunday, or rain's coming, weather's coming, the race is going to end early, we get wild races. There's something about pinned up hostility. So now we've been pinned up for over 2 months. and that could come out. I don't view it as a driver safety issue. We've run a lot of races with very, very limited practice. And the biggest disadvantage is in the lower series where, for example, my son is leading the Xfinity Series points and he's never raced at Darlington. So how does he get ready to go to a very difficult racetrack where he wasn't able to test, he wasn't able to practice But in the cup side of thing, you really don't have that. And in those cases, you have to set realistic goals, right? You have to understand the situation and know that this is an extraordinary situation and just deal with it. I think the biggest mistake that any sport could make at this point, or even business for that matter, is it can't be the way it was, right? So how do you do it? Like, being perfect means what, right? So having a perfect race, what does that mean? And that doesn't matter. What really matters is how can we get on the racetrack and have the people safe with doing it, right? And it doesn't matter how we used to do it. It doesn't matter. It just plain and simple doesn't matter. People adapt. We overcome. We find a way. And that's what sports are about, by the way. So if hockey comes back and they say, hey, we've got to have shorter game matches for whatever reason, the game's got to be a little bit shorter, then it just is what it is. And somebody's going to find a way to do it better than the next. And that's the way I view this, is that these are professional race car drivers that should be exceptionally prepared, that should have taken this time off and gotten in better shape. They've known it's going to be Darlington for quite a while. They should have been studying film. They should have been preparing. And anyone that hasn't, I don't have a lot of sympathy for. So because they're professional athletes, that's what you do. So I'm not concerned from a safety standpoint. There's been a lot of talk for years. A lot of people think the races are better when we have less practice. We're getting ready to find out. I mean,
my golf game doesn't do that. I can tell you that right now.
I don't know, man. I go to the driving range and I hit pop right off the bat. I'm like, yeah, it's gonna be a good day, and I play like crap. You leave all the good ones out on the range. Yeah, I'm sure of that practice.
Well, I want to talk about the drivers, because you actually just made a point, and I heard you mention this in previous interviews as well. They are athletes. I think sometimes people forget that just because they're driving a car, like these are top level professional athletes. You mentioned race shape. They're looking at roughly 1,600 miles in an 11-day stretch of competitive racing. What is race shape? And put yourself back in their shoes. How would you have prepped for this stretch coming up?
The most difficult thing to prep for is the heat. So it's very hard. It's very difficult to put yourself in an environment where you have the heat that's inside of a race car while you're training. That's one of the most difficult things to do. Becomes easier as the weather changes, but it hasn't gotten hot. And so you're going to have drivers that have not been in the cars, have not been dealing with the heat, have not been dealing with the G-forces. That's race shape, right? Same as basketball, right? You hear basketball players, talk about they had an injury, they were training, they trained a lot. The game comes and they can't get through the game because they're not in game shape. So it's the same thing. I will say that if we get an unusually hot couple weekends back to back, it's going to be a test. And that's what I said earlier. Like, what have you been doing for the last 2.5 months? If you've been, on the couch eating, finger foods, playing video games, versus have you been training and have you been preparing, that could tell the tale. But that race shape thing normally takes 2 to 3, 4 races to kind of get yourself in that rhythm. And I think it will here too. But the drivers should be in good enough shape to get themselves to it, even if it's extraordinary hot.
So by the end of this first cycle, everybody should be in the shape that they need to be in for the next cycle.
Exactly.
Is this the blueprint, you think, for the rest of the season? Kind of multiple races at a select number of tracks? And is there a way to, I guess, get the restrictor plate tracks in there, the short tracks, the road tracks, things like that? Or is it just wherever they can go, that's where we're going?
I think it's a combination of those things. I think that, if you look at, I think what you have to do is you have to look at the states that the tracks are in, right? And if you look at the states that the tracks are in, where are the states in regard to their opening up? Where are their states, and does it change? Right. So, the biggest fear is that you start to slowly open up. I was just going to use North Carolina for an example. You start slowly open North Carolina up, and you start getting these numbers and these sicknesses and illnesses, and they're like, hey, we need to shut it back down. That's the biggest fear. I think that's the biggest fear for all of us, for everything, right? Like for our health, for our financials, for everything. I think that's the biggest fear. So I think what's going to happen is the NASCAR is going to come out with a schedule, and they're going to do for the rest of the year, and they're going to do their very best to make that happen. But if something changes, then they're going to have to change a race and go somewhere else. And I think that's all they can do. And if they have to take a race away, that would be disappointing for that race. And it gets very complicated, right? Because sponsors, right? They very few cars today are sponsored by the same sponsor the entire year. Multiple sponsors are on a given car. So if a sponsor bought the Coca-Cola 600, and the Coca-Cola 600 gets postponed and gets changed to a race in Pocono, what does that sponsor say about that? How does that affect their marketing plan? There's things like that make this so complicated. It really is going to take the entire industry working together to get through it. But I do see us running multiple races at the same racetrack. I see us running multiple races at the same racetrack in just a matter of a few days, like we're getting ready to do. Because at some point the year has to have an ending, right? Because there's another year coming. So you got to end it somewhere, somehow. You got to end it. And to get all those races in within a given amount of time, the only thing you can do is have more races in a shorter period of time, or start eliminating races. And the problem with eliminating races is, again, you have sponsors that have agreed to sponsor those races, and now you're starting taking revenue from the teams. You start, there's television money that gets paid to the team, so they won't be eligible for that money. So NASCAR is trying to run all the races because, number one, the fans want to see the races, and number two, from an economic standpoint, it's best for the teams to run the races that are on the schedule.
Yeah, there are a couple sports that can pretty much adapt throughout the course of the year. The indoor sports like basketball and hockey, football can be played in any weather, but you look at baseball and NASCAR, and they're really the ones who kind of have to stick to their seasons. So you really are under the gun to get the races in. But
it's in some ways it's an advantage. Golf, like I think golf and racing have the two best opportunities to go back, right? Because when you're playing golf, you really, if you're a professional golfer, even if you have a caddy and you get your own clubs out of your bag, or maybe you don't have a caddy, maybe he drives a golf cart and you get your bag. I don't know. But to me, golf and racing are the two best opportunities. They also have their challenges, right? Yeah. Because of weather. They're both outside sports, which is an advantage, but it's at a disadvantage. So, it's just like everything else. There's pluses and negatives, but how you get the right number of events in, so that your TV partners, so that your sponsorship, so all that works and makes sense. That's what everybody's going to be juggling.
Well, we've already seen golf has adjusted the schedule to the point where only the British Open is the only major that's been canceled this year. Everything else has been postponed to later in the summer. And even some events, I think they're looking to start in June and July. So that's there. But talk about these two racetracks that you are going to first, Darlington and Charlotte. Who do they set up well for, and who's at a disadvantage?
So
there's somebody who's like, it had to be these two. It had to be these two.
What I look at for Darlington is who's experienced, like who is mature enough to put all this behind them and just go race, right? Because I don't even want to say this is a distraction. Distraction is not a big enough word.
Yeah.
But distractions in sports create bad results. So who has the experience, the mental fortitude, the right team, the right approach to go and attack a racetrack that penalizes you if you do it wrong? At Darlington, you're going to hit something. And I go to the Kyle Bushes, I go to the Kevin Harvicks, I go to those guys that have proven over a period of time that they know how to deal with adversity. They flat out are great race car drivers. They have the experience necessary. Like, I think some of the younger guys, they have an advantage in some ways, but this is just one of those racetracks that I think experience matters, and I think that the people with experience are gonna have the best shot. And Charlotte, Charlotte's a little bit more difficult because most of these drivers have more time at Charlotte than they do at Darlington, because Darlington has gone to running one race a year. Charlotte until last year, they've been run 2 races a year. Now they run the Roval, but a lot of them have run 2 races a year there. In addition to that, they probably ran truck races there. They ran Xfinity races there. The experience level changes a great deal when you go to Charlotte. Ryan Blaney, and when the year stopped, Ryan Blaney was running really, really well, but having disappointing finishes. So somebody like that, who has sat there for 2.5 months simmering, right, over how good we've been, but we didn't get any races won, like those guys, I think will be hard to beat as well.
It is a spectator sport. You mentioned it a little bit earlier that it's going to be different. How do the spectators play a role in the race day atmosphere, and how is that going to be different without them in the stands? Because the cars make a lot of noise. So from the outsider's perspective, it's not as if you're playing basketball where you can feed off that energy. But where does that energy come from?
So the only thing I've never done this before, so keep this in mind. I've never raced in front of no crowd.
Yeah.
I have gone to many, many racetracks and tested, right, and been no crowd. I've been there on practice days, and there'd be a small crowd. The infield's full, but not many people in the grandstands. The fan, even though you can't hear them when you're in the car, there is an energy and an atmosphere that gets created in the whole weekend. So when you roll into the racetrack, the infield's full. There's motorhomes everywhere. There's a sense of excitement. The people are having fun, sometimes too much fun. And you feed off of that. You feed off the fans' energy. And you know that they might not be a fan of you, but they came to watch you race, right? They came to watch it. And there's an energy that gets created by that. And it's going to be when I said distraction earlier, when you go into that infield as a driver and everything's different, right? So your truck's parked in a different place. Your motorhome that you normally stay in isn't allowed in the infield. There's the people that you see at the racetrack normally you don't see. You and another driver aren't sitting there hanging out on pre-race stage, shooting the bull. Like, all that's not going to happen. You're going to have to focus. You're going to have to focus on the task at hand, because it's going to feel so different that for some people it can be overwhelming and get the mindset in the wrong place. And the fans are what create that. The fans are what create that energy, create that atmosphere, the noise, the music, all those stuff that's happening. They're excited to be there. It's a damn party. That's what it is. Mm-hmm. It's a party. And you're the final act in a great party. And it's going to feel a lot different. And I hope that we, for a lot of reasons, I hope we can get fans back in the stands ASAP, because it is a fan-driven sport, period, end of story. And it's going to feel a lot different without fans at the racetrack, a lot.
Well, I know that as sports fans, we're looking forward to any sort of competition that we can view again. I know that we'll be following along. Fox has the first initial races. NBC picks up in the summer, so we'll be following along with you. I do want to say one more note about yourself. You're obviously a 2019 Virginia Sports Hall of Fame inductee. You're on the ballot for the 2021 NASCAR Hall of Fame, which I know has been postponed, but we're going to be pulling for you. Hopefully we can see your name associated with that, so congratulations. But overall, Jeff, it's been a pleasure catching up today. A lot of good information about NASCAR's restart, and just looking forward to getting, again, some of that competition back where we can view. So thanks for taking the time out.
Well, thank you. And thanks everybody for tuning in. The Virginia Sports Hall of Fame there is, I was inducted, and it was a great moment. Great. You guys have a beautiful facility and great ceremony. I had a great time. It was a lot of fun. And it was an honor to be part of it. And I will be really glad when you guys can get open back up and have your ceremony, because it's a lot of fun. I mean, for anyone that's watching this haven't been, when you get open that back up, buy some tickets and go, because it is a real fun, laid back, fun night. It's a really fun night to hear stories and just have those conversations. It's definitely worth going to.
Well, we appreciate that. And I'm going to put you on the PR payroll after that. So I appreciate that. Again, you can follow Jeff on Twitter at Jeff Burton. Catch him on NASCAR America and NBC Sports Network and their NASCAR coverage. I'd like to thank everyone who tuned in again today. These have been a lot of fun. As always, thanks to our partners, Priority Automotive, City of Virginia Beach, Optima Health, ESPN Radio 94.1. Be sure to follow us on all of our social platforms at VA Sports HOF. Archived episodes of our Hall Call podcast are on SoundCloud, Spotify, and our website. Once again, I'm Will Driscoll. I'm hoping everybody's staying safe, staying healthy. Sports is coming back, so be on the lookout. We'll speak to everybody soon.